say. What are the theories? Again, stakeholder theory, legitimacy theory, institutional theory, and signaling theory. Now, one interesting thing, in both the cases, these theories are common. Then how do we interpret it? A glass containing water. Some say 50% filled, some say 50% empty. The philosophy of visions, it matters. Theory is saying, but they are looking to the performance of this standard setting body is their own part. Now, early economists had the environment. What has happened? I say, early economists never thought of environmental issue. Why? Because it could not be measured in monetary terms. Why? They thought non-monetary aspects should not be considered. Early. But later on, what has happened? Modern economics has considered non-monetary dimensions. Even in the Keynes theory also, we find that in welfare economics, that yes, welfare matters. It is not always the money. Similarly, holistic and inclusive perspective is now considered by the economists as comparatively early. The issue is what? Early economics and money measurement conflict. That is again another interesting thing. Traditional economists emphasized monetary measurement, but classical framework focused on quantifiable market transactions. But excluded some issues, non-monetary aspects were largely excluded due to measurement difficulty. But modern economics are saying that welfare, sustainability, and social well-being has to be measured and has to be included. Broader value of understanding beyond money, qualitative and qualitative dimensions has to be included. Now, what is the consequence of it? Money measurement focus versus broader welfare perspective on accounting and finance. The offshoot, the influence of that perception of economics has ingressed into the domain of accounting and finance. Early accounting and finance focus strictly on monetary value, reflecting a narrow economic perspective, where non-monetary aspects like social and environmental impacts were largely ignored. And modern approach, they are trying to consider it now. It has emerged into two types of accounting schools. One traditional accounting school and another is expanded accounting school. Now, the modern is broader impact measurement using non-financial and mathematical models. That is very interesting, start, interesting investigation, interesting insights, all the critical brains that yes, it is no more that debit and credit. Mathematical models should make an inroads into the domain of accounting and finance. Next comes the debate. Core periphery debate. Does it really exist? Yes, it exists. Core versus periphery. Core means traditional monetary transaction-based accounting, and periphery, ESG, social and non-monetary impacts. Now, when that debate exists, integration mechanism is an issue. When that debate exists, dynamic evolution. What is that? Shift from the static concept of obsolete versus emerging to the emerging to core to periphery. We are changing the nomenclature, obsolete and modern. We are saying the same. It is core to periphery and periphery to core. That is a transition. Swing is going on, just like a pendulum of a clock. Now, what is the outcome? Convergence of financial and non-financial values in decision making. Now, can it be substantiated by any theory? Yes. Complexity theory, institutional theory. If we recourse to that, we find this justification are there. So, sustainability reporting has not failed, but is partially effective and still evolving with the gap between intent, that is the theory, and execution, that is the practice. The question is, how to bring the periphery to the core? Approach A. Periphery integrates into the core via monetizing non-financial impacts, shadow pricing, carbon pricing, so on and so forth. Valuation expands through environmental, natural capital, and human resource accounting. And integrated reporting aligns financial and substantial disclosure. And quantification tool includes scoring models, econometrics. These are hot things. Not, I would say, in thing. These are already there. But one of the interesting issues in econometrics is that it is supposed that all variables are linearly related. Does it linearly related? This is a $1 million question. We presume, we assume, and we do not question. And that is why the domain of behavioral economics has set in. So when we talk about sustainability, we'll have to talk about behavioral dimensions also. Most of these studies, this is this. Now, these are the supporting things. Now, next stage. One is, this is what second stage. Assimilation between the core and periphery. Earlier one was how to bring, but it is just like in the domain of science, if you can say, students from science, or we know there is a basic difference between compound and mixture. In mixture, we mix the things, but original characteristics remains, like sand and sugar. In earlier approach, that is there. They remain their identity. But in compound, when certain chemicals like lime, sand, and all these are, put into fire, glass comes out. This glass. And it cannot be changed back to its original form, and that is a compound. And here, this assimilation between core and periphery is, we are looking into from that, whether it can be added compound one. Now, this is again similar to the journey like bioinformatics, biology and information technology. They are assimilating and new disciplines emerging. Here is this. What is the core here? Monetary transaction-based accounting system. And what is the periphery already discussed? So what is the gap here? Non-monetary impacts remain unmeasured. Now, assimilation, yes, develop valuation models, converting impacts into economic values and outcome enables integration of sustainability dimensions into formal accounting. Now, when Glasgow developed four periphery accounting assimilation, the detailed model is there. Once it comes out, then you feel like I discussed this whole model, detailed discussions are there. But considering the dictates of the chairman sir had allowed to write my thoughts within the time frame, so I'm skipping that part. But yes, the core of that detailed models, it is there. It is a traditional monetary accounting framework. Periphery is this process, systematic identification and valuation of variables. And what is this? This conversion. It is translates its impact into economic value or its equivalent scope or implicits. These three word phrases are very, very critical here. Integration means embedded into financial reporting. And what is the outcome? Holistic, sustainability-oriented accounting system. And if you ask me what is the justification, I fall back on all those theories. It is what? Stakeholders theory, triple bottom line theory, legitimacy theory, integrated reporting theory, and full cost accounting theory. They provide us the argument that these are possible and logical. But interesting issue. accountant, does the finance people understand the value of money in the same sense and the same spirit? Everybody is measuring in terms of money. Economist is trying to measure, accountant is trying to measure, and finance manager is also trying to measure. But their perspectives are different. Where is the difference? Economist measures welfare opportunity cost, this opportunity cost, and intangibles, past and future oriented, is subjective. When it is an accounting, it is focused on actual transactions, historical cost, objective, rule-based past only. But when it is the domain of finance, then it is future expectations, risk and time value, and market-driven and analytical. So we find three different focus from three disciplines on the measurement of value. And this has created major impediments generating a common statement. Just like what? Share market indices. To find an anchoring of buy up. So many variations, but still we believe indices. Can we find that type of indices? That was the argument. Yes, it is possible. How we did it? Using cluster analysis and pseudo-probability driven assimilation. So cluster analysis, what it does? It groups firms, transactions with similar financial sustainability patterns, acts as a bridge between core and the periphery, enables pattern recognition, classification of integration, and supports pseudo-probabilistic interpretation of accounting behavior. And what are the supporting theories? And again, contingency theory, legitimacy theory, stakeholders theory, and institutional theory. If you fall back on those theories, we find the logic into it. Now, what is the suitability of cluster analysis? It integrates cluster analysis with pseudo-probabilities, replaces rigid classification with probabilistic membership. Now, here's the static membership. But when we use pseudo-probabilities, it doesn't tell us static probabilities. Then what does it take? We'll come to that a little bit later. It captures overlap, ambiguity, and boundary conditions in financial and sustainability behavior. And it enhances interpretability of AI-driven classification. So we can accommodate AI, artificial intelligence, in this model. And it supports nuanced decisions making and policy formation. Again, you can fall back on theory. Now, what is this suitability of pseudo-probabilities? Pseudo-probabilities from AI clustering indicates degree of membership in latent behavior or substantiality clusters. It reflects position in multi-dimensional non-linear system, not fixed aggregates. And unlike traditional indices, they are model-driven and non-additive. Now it captures uncertainty, ambiguity, and transitional states. It functions as a dynamic indicators of behavioral intensity and systematic positioning. And it simplifies complexity like market indices, but retain probabilistic usage. Now here what happens when we use probability and pseudo-probabilities, it tells us a very interesting story that. But before, I'll press on something. Now, why so many theories? What is the logic? If we analyze these theories that we have referred to, some are core theories, why sustainability is needed, some are structural theories, how it is integrated into reporting, economic theories, what value means, behavioral theories, how discussions are made, analytical theories, that is, it provides tools for modeling, sustainability theories, it talks about application in finance and management, regulatory and innovative theories, how it tells us how it spreads, and then ecological theories, it tells us long-term planetary alignment. Now, what will we do if we follow this? This gives us a very interesting situation. We find a quadrant classification. What is that? Some effort sustainable for both business and environment. So there is a scenario. In the second quadrant, efforts are sustainable for the business, but not sustainable for the environment. What is the third cluster that this analysis generates? Not suitable for the business, but it is suitable for the sustainability of the mother nature. And fourth cluster, not suitable for either of them. This cluster-driven assimilation gives us a statistical figure, almost, I will not say exactly same of share market indices, but very akin to like that. But beautifully, its beauty is that it talks about probability of that firm to switch over from one gradient, one quadrant to the another quadrant. What is the probability in the future? So entire, it is not history, though it is based on history data. It is futuristic, probabilistic. It is deterministic with the future orientation. So this last is very important. How do we address? If we look into the efforts of the business houses, standard setting equities, they are being not. But since this classification is not there, so means or we have to have pivotal approach, means targeting specially each of these segments, what we teach to our students of marketing. So, in conclusion, the journey from core to periphery and back represents not merely a conceptual adjustment, but a systemic transformation in how value is defined, measured, and operationalized. By integrating advanced analytical tools with sustainability-oriented thinking, we move towards a paradigm in which profitability and planetary well-being are not competing objectives, but mutually reinforcing outcomes. The central challenge that remains is not one of understanding, but of implementation. The courage to translate this evolving framework into actionable practice using AI. Kaharwa Noida Bravai. There is a famous song. I believe we all know. Raja Sandashi. We know about Kamalakanta. Kamalakanta led us and served our mind for thinking to the nationality. But now, we carry along with us all those Shoshikant, Kaharwa Noida Bravai, Shoshikant, Ashotake Golden Mati. So long, all the players in the domain of sustainability, they were playing Kaharwa. And those who are into classical music, they know Kaharwa is a fun frolic type of things. When the song is about fun and frolics, Kaharwa is played. But when it's a serious matter, Dabra is played. So let us bring those Shoshikantos. Now we teach Shoshikanto. Kamalakanta is gone. So that music of sustainability is revived. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bhawal. One question to you. Will play the role of Shoshikanto in today's corporate world?
Yes. Now here it is interesting. The role of independent directors are there.
What is the role of SEBI or company law board?
I'm not going into that. They say they are directly involved with the independent director. Like the representatives of the SEBI, like the representatives of the company law board. You can become the independent director. You can register with the company law board.
Okay, thank you, Professor Bhawal. Now we have a question answer section of 10 minutes. After the completion of there is a two speakers lecture. So I'd like to invite Professor Dolopa Chakraborty. So over to Professor Dolopa Chakraborty for some insightful talk about these interesting topics, sustainability.
Regarding independent director, so now this recent case has happened with HDFC Bank, where one of the independent director has resigned. I think Malda College, and that triggered a mammoth impact on the HDFC.
HDFC Bank's CEO also resigned.
CEO also
Yes,
CEO
HDFC also resigned over that issue.
over that issue.
Over that issue. And it is a massive share fall in the HDFC Bank share price.
Even RBI is forced to issue a statement that everything is okay with HDFC Bank. They are forced to, because this is one of the system effects.
Thank you, Chair, learned co-speaker, distinguished scholars and dear students of Malda College. It's my privilege today to be here to address this gathering, and my extreme thanks and gratitude to Malda College for rendering this hospitality to us. Thank you. My presentation would be on efficacy of weather derivatives in sustainable finance. Now, we are all talking about, we just heard from our learned co-speaker and the chairperson a little while earlier, that it has become a buzzword probably after Corona, our chairperson has said. Now, why is it so? Because we are all going through a kind of severe kind of a climate crisis. In the sense, if you just look around what is happening around you with our climate, there has been melting of your glaciers and ice sheets on land, there has been loss of sea ice, our oceanic waters level has risen, and that's because there is typical kind of phenomenon, geographically we call it El Nino phenomenon. El Nino is basically the warming of the surface water of the Pacific Ocean. Now when it warms up, then it actually expands those oceanic waters, and that increases the sea level. So El Nino phenomenon has increased over the years. Then our global average temperature, now we are basically globally, I'm talking about globally, we are climate-wise, we are politically very correct in the sense, we always go into some kind of negotiation and agreement and set certain standards. That standard we have globally set in Paris Agreement way back in 2015, that all the nations virtually agreed that we will keep the global warming to a critical threshold of 1.5 degrees centigrade. That was the agreement made way back in 2015. Now in 2018, one United Nations body IPCC has come up with a report that we are likely to breach that threshold within 2030. So that is the kind of alarming situation that we are into, that we will be having extremely hot days in our part, in wherever we go, in every part of the world. Our sea level has risen. There has been frequent occurrences of catastrophes and natural disaster. In Kolkata last September, we had a kind of inhuman cloudburst where the entire city was underwater. And the kind of water level that we had witnessed, we had probably not witnessed even 30 or 40 decades back. So there has been increased occurrences of such catastrophe. As a result, crop failures, extinction of species, and your loss of habitat for the planet are the crises that we are all facing. Now, obviously, we might suppose that this climate is an environmental issue. It's no longer an environmental issue today. It is more a financial issue today. Why? Because the climate has become a core systemic risk for the finance sector, because anything that your business does, it has an impact on our climate in terms of GHG or greenhouse gas emissions. And so mitigating this climate change, this adverse climate will also have an impact on the business revenue as well. So mitigating this climate change has become essential, even from the viewpoint of the financial sector. In terms of when we try and develop strategies to mitigate climate change, we are supposed to actually develop strategies to deal with physical risk. The word physical risk implies wherever any catastrophe occurs or whenever any extreme weather events occur, it will have a devastating impact on the asset, property and infrastructure. So the business on the first place must deal with the physical risk. The second risk is that if we are turning to a kind of renewable sources of energy, right, that is we are turning to low carbon economy, then our existing carbon intensive infrastructure like our coal plant, our fuel reserve, they will become stranded and they will turn unprofitable. So there is a problem of stranded asset for the business. Then there is also a problem that if you are turning to low carbon economy, the government may impose tax that if you emit more, you will be penalized by way of tax. So it is hitting on their bottom line. Then there are emission caps. So these kind of policy or regulatory risks are also there. And also if the climate affects any business where down in India, obviously the ripple effect will flow to US as well. So due to interconnectedness of the global system, this is having a cascading effect. So it is no longer an environmental issue today. So basically, what we need to do is, basically to address the climate risk in terms of your assessment and mitigation. That is, we want to understand how climate is impacting business, and then how businesses can develop strategies to mitigate the climate risk. So it must involve an analysis of the consequences, the likelihood, the responses of the business, and how societal constraints are there in adapting these options. So climate risk management has become an essential today. Now in this context, I would like to take up actually 3 key words in the domain of finance. One is sustainable finance, that I'm going to compare with green finance, and the third I'm going to compare it with climate finance. Now the word sustainable as it goes, we are hearing it in the domain of accounting, we are hearing it in the domain of management and probably every around. So the word sustainable finance actually means, it refers to a process of financing which takes into account 3 criteria: environmental, social and governance consideration into financial decision making. Which means when a financer like a banker or a lender will lend money or will finance a company, it will finance such a kind of a company which has probably a strong labor policy which goes into a social consideration, which has a very robust supply chain and a sustainable supply chain which goes into a kind of an environmental consideration, and which is also low carbon, again an environmental consideration. So basically the environmental consideration means they are emitting less, or they are adopting strategies which are actually emitting lesser amount of GHGs. Social means you are taking care of your people and you are taking care of your human rights issues, your inequality issues. So, and governance means you are building up an effective governance in terms of good employee relations, employee relations and executive compensation. So that's sustainable finance. Now the goal of any business is to go or to seek sustainable finance. But what businesses do, they can invest in a kind of sustainable technology which is green enough, because the term green focuses primarily on environment. They hit on the environment. They don't hit on social or governance issue. So green financing is about a process of financing which aims at reducing the ecological or environmental footprint. It gives no consideration to social or governance issues. And climate finance is even a subset of green finance, which actually aims at emitting less into the atmosphere in terms of GHG. Because when you look at green finance, suppose if I want to draw an example to distinguish between these 3 terms, as I said before, sustainable finance is about financing a company which has good governance, good social considerations and good environmental consideration. Now, when we talk about green finance, it is about the same company issuing, suppose, a green bond to set up a solar power plant. So there is a environmental technology which it has to finance by securing kind of finance from a financer, which is called a green finance. Now, the climate finance would be, it's more about climate change adaptation and mitigation. That is, I'm building up a seawall construction when I know that when that super cyclone or cyclone comes and the waves, they lash onto the land, so I can have a seawall construction, I'm funding that, right? Or I'm having a kind of large wind farm project where the winds are captured and converted to some kind of an energy. So that is a kind of climate finance. Now, these are the differences between the three terms. Now, basically, the sustainable finance, as I said, it encompasses both green and climate, but obviously the reverse is not true. So, our objective is certainly to go into sustainable finance, but there are certain issues of conflict when we actually move into the concept of sustainable finance. The conflict is that as a banker or as a financer, would I be that willing to provide funds to promote sustainable finance? Or would I go with traditional financing? Now, for a banker, the issues are that whether they would have to fund more or fund less. Now, these kind of projects require a lot of investment capital. You can't actually fund a solar power plant like you can fund buying a house. Buying a house would cost you much less than actually setting up or constructing a solar power plant. So these projects involve a lot of investment capital. So financer in the first place must stand ready to provide a huge amount of investment into these kind of projects. This is one limitation. Second limitation is with the payback period. We all know, we all are aware of financial management. In fact, many students are here. When you take up the subject of financial management, your teachers or faculty teach you about payback period of investment, about return on investment. Payback is a very essential thing. Why? Because when you're investing your money, you want to know how fast you can recover that money. Now, these projects of sustainable finance have a very long payback. They don't earn you money very fast. In fact, many projects are there where you see no money in the first few years of its actually operation, right? So they have a long payback period. Now, traditional finances, they see that the return is not justified by risk. We often talk about risk-adjusted return. Now, these projects give you very inadequate risk-adjusted return. So, as a financer, I don't have motive because at the end of the day, I am answerable to my boss that whether I am earning enough revenue from my company or not. So, if I start as a loan manager of a bank, if I start financing these projects where my return is very low, then I'll be getting some kind of bashing from my boss, right? So, that is an issue. There is also a problem with liquidity. Liquidity means, like these, as I said, the cash recovery is not that swift. So there is a liquidity mismatch between the finances horizon, like finances when they finance, they know that it is a 5-year loan which I've given to this company. So within 5 years, my cash flows will be recovered. But the project where these money are invested, they will not yield cash flows within 5 years. So there is entirely a maturity mismatch. So there is a problem with liquidity. And as I said, to follow up all these issues, there is a myopic vision of the business strategies. There is also lack of experts understanding that what is sustainable, because at the end of the day, sustainability, as in fact it has been spoken in the inaugural session as well, it actually doesn't start in business, it starts at your home. Whether we practice sustainability at home or not, we are the same people who are working in any organization or the other. So if we do not as an individual practice sustainability, how do we expect the organizations to practice sustainability at the end? So these are the issues which are there with your sustainable finance. Now there are many financing alternatives. I am not just going into detail because of paucity of time, because I have to enter into the other area as well. Now there are many sustainable finance products and market mechanisms. But the product that I am trying to deal with out here is weather derivatives. Now, let me just point out to you. Now, any organization or any financial sector cannot achieve sustainable finance in one go. There is a transition that the sector has to make towards sustainable finance. That is, initially the green technology is not there. I have to practice so that I am emitting less to the atmosphere, or I am taking such steps which makes me better adapt to the climate change, and hence ultimately I can actually go to a point where I am investing in green technology or sustainable technology. So the earlier stage, as I gradually proceed towards sustainable finance, is known as a kind of transition finance. So weather derivatives actually is a part of sustainable finance tool, but it is more a transition finance tool, where you are actually using this as a risk management tool to hedge your losses which is occurring due to fluctuation in weather conditions. That is the whole idea why weather derivatives have generated. So derivatives, since many students are there, so derivatives are nothing but basically a contract between two entities where you are buying or selling something underlying at a prefixed price. Now we are all familiar with stock derivatives, index derivatives, option derivatives. Here it is weather derivatives where the underlying is a weather variable. Weather variable means either temperature or rainfall or snowfall or wind speed or storm activity. So you do not have anything tangible out here. It is basically a weather variable. And this weather risk has certain peculiarity which you are trying to hedge using these weather derivatives. So what is the peculiarity of basically weather derivative? Before we move into that, we must differentiate between weather risk, catastrophic risk and climate risk. Now weather is basically the risk to the business, that is risk to its financial revenue and equity value, which is emerging due to fluctuations of weather from normal. So if I take the normal temperature to be 18 degrees centigrade or 65 degrees Fahrenheit, if the temperature rises above this or lower than this, is basically a weather risk. Cat risk is not due to regular weather fluctuation. It is due to extreme weather events like a sudden cloud burst, which your Kolkata faced last September, or a tsunami, or a tornado. So this is more catastrophic risk. The difference between weather and catastrophic risk is your weather risk is more frequent in occurrence and it is a low density risk. But catastrophic risk is less frequent in occurrence and it is more extensive in its damage to property and life. And this difference makes or brings about difference in the managing these two kind of risk. What is the difference? When you think about an insurance, we have insurance for catastrophic risk in the form of cat insurance or cat bonds, but we cannot have an insurance for weather risk. Why? Because it is more frequent. Just imagine any insurance company, the amount of losses that it will incur if it starts insuring weather risk. And more so, I will come to the peculiarity of weather risk, that suppose I am a farmer, I am farming in a particular land and I face the risk of heavy rainfall, which will damage my crops. Right? So if there is heavy rainfall or if there is drought, whatever may be the condition, if I am facing a loss, I will make an insurance claim. The probability is all other farmers in my locality is also facing a similar problem. They will also make an insurance claim. So how does the insurance company mitigate its own risk or own losses? The concept of insurance is when I face a loss, you do not face a loss. So that's how they nullify the effect and they make revenue. But that insurance risk pooling concept will not work when we try and address weather risk. It has to be a derivative to manage this kind of risk, which we can actually do with your catastrophic risk. We can have insurance. Now, climate risk is something, it is about more of global warming. That is, in general, if the global warming occurs, naturally it increases both weather fluctuations as well as catastrophic events. Now, apart from these two, if we just look at certain peculiarity of weather risk, I already said that it is very much geographically localized in nature. It is also volumetric. Volumetric means that instead of affecting the unit price, it affects the volume of production or raw material consumption. In the sense that if I look at, suppose, a soft drink or an ice cream company. Now, if this summer is not that hot, if it is cooler than that baseline, that is 65 degree Fahrenheit or 18 degrees centigrade, means our summer temperature is below that, means it's a comparatively cooler summer. So people will not have ice cream or soft drink, right? So it will directly impact on the volume of sales. Price of soft drink or ice cream may remain fixed. So it is not affecting price, it is affecting the volume. Suppose during heavy rainfall, if you look at the coal plants, due to the wet coal problem, they need to demand for more coal to actually generate power, if I look at the thermal power company. So due to that wet coal problem, the demand for raw material will increase. So it is affecting the volume demanded or supplied rather than the unit price. That is another special feature. It is systemic because, as I said, it is impacting probably all, because no one can control weather risk, and also it cannot be predicted. We do predict weather fluctuation, but we cannot predict over a longer horizon. That is the first specialty. The fourth specialty is that it is a non-core risk. We heard about core and non-core from my just earlier learned speaker. Now, the problem is these environmental variables are non-core, but if you look at a business as a portfolio with a rate of return to you, then it is always beneficial for any investor if these non-core areas get addressed. So it is a non-core risk which the businesses must try to mitigate. And another thing is it is not a tradable product. We cannot buy and sell weather anywhere. So which makes it different when we develop a weather derivative, it becomes different from a normal derivative. Why? Because for a normal derivative, the underlying you can trade, whether it is shared or it is commodities or whatever. But whether you cannot trade, so pricing of these contracts becomes a bit difficult. Now these are the industries which are exposed to weather risk. So if I arrive at a definition somewhat to the weather derivative, basically it is a derivative instrument with a synthetic weather index. Now why do I call it a synthetic weather index? Because in real terms it is not a tangible commodity which you can hold or you can see or you can buy and sell. So it is a synthetic weather index comprising of any weather variable. It can be temperature, rainfall, snowfall, wind speed, whatever, as underlying, whose payoff is based on deviation of the actual value of the index from its predetermined threshold. So if I want to actually find out the actual value of the index, now it's an index, it's not any temperature. So how do I generate that index? Suppose temperature is my underlying variable. So I will generate that index by aggregating temperature over a certain area. Like the first weather derivative emerged as OTC contract, over-the-counter contract in US, based on the city of Milwaukee. It was a contract between Koch Industries and Enron way back in 1996 or 97, mid-90s. Right? So basically, based on an area, I will develop an index in some way. Then I need to measure that variable at the weather stations. So it can be a single weather station. Suppose I want to cover the weather risk of Kolkata. I will measure the weather at Dongam only, or I will take a weather station at Dongam and other areas, and I will make a weighted addition of that. Somehow, some logic I will apply to find out the actual index value. The deviation of this actual index value from the benchmark is my source of calculation of payoff. So payoff is determined based on deviation of that actual value of the index from the benchmark value. That's how weather derivative contract is usually generated. So what are the prerequisites or elements of this contract? I will definitely have a contract period. I will have a measuring station where I will measure that weather. That also need to be defined. The weather variable needs to be defined. The index has to be calculated in some way or the other. The tick rate, that is I want to attach a monetary value to each degree of deviation because that will generate my payoff function. And finally an option premium going by standard logic. The premium has to be paid by the holder to the writer of the option. So these are the elements of the weather derivative contract. Now quick look at the index values. Now we might be aware that who are actually the players in this weather derivative market. Now these weather derivatives are actually, they have two kinds of market, one primary, the other secondary market. In the primary market, there are a group of speculators who actually use this contract to make profit. And who are they? They are primarily hedge funds, banks, insurance companies. We have certain energy companies also who are acting as speculators. And who are hedgers who are actually entering into the contract to mitigate their weather risk? They are primarily agricultural companies and energy companies and transport companies. So basically the primary market speculators are selling these contracts to the hedgers and hedgers are buying them to mitigate their risk. And in the secondary market, it is the speculators who are trading between themselves to actually make a profit. Right? Now, in India, as of now, it is still under contemplation. It has not been introduced for trading as of now by SEBI. But in US, it is very much there in Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Very much trading occurs in weather derivatives. So the index, they may be based on aggregate measures of weather, or they may be based on adverse days. Aggregate measures means we want to find out the total amount of rainfall over the contract period, or mean of temperature over the contract period. Adverse days are, we calculate the based on degree day. Degree day means to what extent the temperature deviates from that baseline. So heating degree day or HDD concept is applied to measure how cold the winter is. Means to what extent the temperature falls below that baseline 18 degree or 65 degree Fahrenheit. So the more it falls below that means 1 degree day, that degree day is either maximum of that value or 0, whichever is higher. So we are calculating this HDD for say 30 days period. If the contract validity is for 30 days, for each 30 days we are calculating this HDD either as 0 if it is above 18 degree centigrade or 65 degree Fahrenheit, or if it is below, then that difference becomes the value. Then we are calculating the index as sum of their daily HDDs. The point is that if the winter is too cold, then obviously the demand for electricity will be higher. Right? So if the demand for electricity will be higher, the generation also has to be higher. So if we often find the electric companies may not be able to face that, we do not have that cold winter, but we do have very hot summer. And frequently we find there is a power drop, there is a voltage drop, or we go out of power. Now to mitigate that, those electricity companies can actually enter into these kind of derivative contract to hedge their losses, because that brings about losses to their volume of your production. So cooling degree day similarly is measured as how hot the summer is, and we can transform these two if an energy company enters into an energy degree day, which actually substitute both HDD and CDT during winter and summer months. So we have on your temperature, we have on rainfall deficit index, like daily shortfall in rainfall in the contract period, then we are aggregating that. We have wind indices and cumulative aggregate measures of weather. We have cumulative rainfall index. We have under temperature mean of daily median temperature, then sum of average daily temperature of contract over contract period. These are some of the ways in which the indices are measured. Once indices are measured, we calculate the deviation of the actual values of the index from the baseline, and we calculate how much degree day. Based on that, the payoff is determined, and obviously it is the holder who pays premium to the seller, and ultimately when the contract matures, the seller actually has to compensate the holder or the buyer. So these are basically the concept, and I just mentioned a few things about this, like the types of weather derivative contract that exist, and just some research issues to highlight before I end my lecture. Those who want to go into research, they can actually evaluate the hedging effectiveness of these weather derivative contract. Now, if you look at the corporate, actually now those who are exposed to weather risk, like your energy companies, your transport companies are actually facing the risk of rainfall, heavy rainfall, snowfall. That becomes a problem for them, not really temperature. So energy companies, transport companies, we have dairy firms being exposed to weather risk. Then we have basically the agricultural firms are already there who are exposed to construction companies, because if there is heavy rainfall, usually the construction companies, they face time and cost overrun in their project. They face delay in completion of their project. So how do they manage both kinds of risk? Price risk with price derivatives and volume risk with weather derivatives. So that effectiveness can also be examined if someone is interested into moving into research into these kinds. Then pricing is a bit complex issue. As I said, you cannot apply the traditional Dashoes model out here. It has to be altogether a different pricing with the underlying being a non-tradable product. So that also you may examine. And finally, as we have speculators in this market also who are actually buying and selling derivatives as an asset to make profit. So we can also think of that in my investment portfolio as an investor. If I'm investing in shares, bonds, real estate, and also weather derivatives in it, so how well will my portfolio perform as compared to a normal portfolio. So these are the some issues that I wanted to share, and that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your patient hearing, and if any query arises,
Okay, thank you, Professor Tonuka Chakraborty. Now, as for the program, there is a 10 minutes for question and answer sessions. So, any questions from the dais, please?
Talking about India, the concept of India, how things were derivatives in that piece undertaken in Indian context. Because in USA, it's from Indian context, what we use.
there is prospect for this, because if we look at the kind of revenue of our power companies, now naturally they can hedge their losses to their bottom line by undertaking such contracts. But yes, if you say that should be open the market for speculation to begin with, I think that SEBI will not allow. It will probably begin with a kind of a hedging concept where it will have a role to play as well, as a guarantor, only the primary. Then probably when the market matures, primary market matures, then it can, the way our share market actually behaves. So that the SEBI can contribute, as far as my opinion is.
Anyone?
Can I have a suggestion to you convert this lecture into a very nice clip on derivatives?
So December would be better. Okay, sir.
So many things.
One question regarding green finance. So in this particular green finance case, the effective is law. So if there is a legal provisions to implement the green finance in the context of India.
Legal provisions, I don't think I don't think the RBI has, as of now, has come up with any legal provision. But the way probably our government is pushing for this climate issue and environmental issue, they may, like we have priority sector lending to lend to certain specific sectors, they may have similar kind of norms to big financiers over time, because they are pushing for that solar plant. They are asking households to build solar panel, so they are also providing finance to do that. So there may be a push from the government in the near future.
Anyone?
The very idea of code and derivative, so far I remember, dates back to Andre Frank's renowned economist around 1960. He enunciated this concept, code and derivative relation between USA and Latin American countries. This is my part of that. Another point is that you have mentioned how value is defined. Perhaps everybody knows there are two types of value, use value and exchange value. And what kind of value can be one? And the last one is economics, classical economics, not traditional economics. Classical economics, perhaps Nagel and Marx, all were very concerned about the nature, dialectic, the mechanism by Taylor's. They did extensive mechanism. So my understanding is that classical economy is also very concerned about environment. Thank you, Malda.
Thank you for your observation. When I said those classical and these, I wanted. Fine. Use value and use value and exchange value stands. And if I may add into it, hedonic value. Hedonic value. Students of marketing will talk about hedonic value. Means, I can give an example from my area. Tribal communities are there. They have a product that is called Jambithalian. The Jambithalian is basically what? It is a symbol of that Karbi community. They have the 5 clans. Now, why they are retaining it? It is their prestige. But when an outsider visits there and want to buy those things as a souvenir, they charge 2,000 rupees. Tourists say, why it is 2,000? Its cost should be only 100. How much material is there? So this is happening now. What you are saying is correct. But my contention that we try to do is, it looks apparently all are money value. But economists looking at money value in a different way. Accountants are looking at money value in a different way. And the finance people are measuring the money value in a different way. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think all these values are well defined in the literature,
Yes, sir.
both in economics as well as in economics.
Yes, sir.
Well, there are some conflicts,
Yes.
but at the same time, there can be becomes very
Exactly. So that is why, where is the some assimilation? These differences can be clustered using the cluster analysis.
That's important thing.
Yes. Yes, yes. So in clustering, what it does, now you see, as a researcher, we know, measurements are or ordinary, or continuous, or ratio scale. But the beauty of this cluster analysis is that it can encompass all type of things.
Now the short book period of models, who is delivering lectures in different parts of the world, they also say that different aspects of আপনার যেটা বিশ্বাসই না করেন জমবে না বুঝে যাবেন and সেই বিশ্বাসটা রাখতে হবে
As I could agree, and what you are saying, this is 100% correct. But in cancer, two groups of patients are created. In one group, they were said, they were whispered, dear patient, we have medicine. This is a very, very important medicine. But in fact, they were not given the original medicines and they were given only water. And other groups, control groups, they were going through the same medicines. But interestingly, recovery rate was for those groups who were denied medicine and given the water. So rightly said, you rightly said. Ultimately, mind matters, belief matters. It is yes.
I have a suggestion to your presentation.
Yes, please.
You know the time perspective, you know the topic also. So keeping both in mind, if you reduce it, then this can be difficult.
Sure.
Otherwise, even if I want to prepare a paper, I will be lost in the process.
I will.
You agree with me? Because with my limited knowledge, I will be virtually lost in the process. Therefore, your model should be framed in such a way, your experts will do it in such a way that this is understandable, it is expressible, and this is right.
Thanks, Sir. But at the same time, I have a submission. I am not a teacher, sir. Gautam Buddha, Jesus Christ, they have said the ultimate truth. I am still learner, and I have landed into a confusion. So I share this confusion with this August House. So thank you for your advice.
The problem is Gautam is always traveling by fast train. So sometimes we have to travel by local train also.
And I think that one thing, that's why I think you have emphasis on cluster analysis.
Yes.
So it's your own thought, or that thought is practiced in the corporate sector?
It is not practiced.
Not practiced.
Not practiced. But
So
when,
I think that-
when my scholars I did research on behavioral finance.
that's right.
Behavioral finance
Yeah.
using cluster
And I think
analysis.
that within the cluster analysis,
Yes.
you have to, there is many factors.
Yes.
You have to assign some weight to different factors. Then you can.
No, cluster analysis doesn't require weights. That is the beauty. Beauty is that it doesn't assume any type of linear or non-linear relationship that exists in the data. It can read the data, and from the data itself, suppose there are, just to understand the purpose, 400 samples are there. Cluster analysis will take 70% of the data, means 280. They will frame the relationship, and for the rest 30% of the data, they will try to prove the relationship that has been derived from the data itself, not for the presumed or idea decision.
So it is a linear relationship.
No, it is never linear. It doesn't, no, it is very interesting. It is a non-linear. But interestingly, if this is applied to the data which we know is linearly exists, this cluster analysis also says that yes, it is linear. So it is
It is very confusing. definition to me. It
Yes.
is not linear, not linear, not non-linear, then how can you just...
No, actually it is neural network analysis. Now, how do our neurons perform in our brain? Is it linear? It is not linear, sir. Yes, please.
As I understood, your plan A and plan B.
Yes.
Actually, plan A is what we are doing in the corporate world.
Yes.
And plan B is what you are suggesting or you are advocating.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes, yes. 100%.
Now I want to know if both the parties have the similar information about weather focus, then why the counterparty will agree to enter into such contract? That means these are not so much extreme, that is catastrophic weather events. These are predictable nowadays with the help of technology. If my counterparty is also having the same expectation, why you still agree to enter into the contract?
Actually, the thing is that this is true for any kind of financial instrument. If I know that the shares would rise, then why is it that some would buy, some would sell? So because they have an already existing exposure in different dimensions, right? So one objective is that those who are hedging, their objective is that of risk management. So they are trying to mitigate losses or financial losses in their business by entering into a weather derivative contract, by going into long into that contract, by buying the contract, right? So even if it is predicted for a shorter horizon. If you think about a power company, say a thermal power company, who has an issue with the coal during rainfall or during drought or whatever, now they want to hedge over a longer period. So it will not be a kind of a stock derivative, which is a 3-month contract or a 4-month contract. They would probably go into 6 months or a 1-year contract to hedge their financial losses for that period. So that is the objective for an energy company to buy the contract. Now the objective of a kind of a bank to sell a similar contract, knowing it very well that the probability that over a period of time that the weather will fluctuate. Now he is looking at the speculative part, so he is combining this contract with some other contract. The way derivatives occur, we go into options where we actually combine put option with call option to create synthetic strategies called strangle to make profit out of it. So that is the objective of the bank as a speculator to enter into the contract. So any financial market thrives because their objective of participation is different. If we had similar objective, like we all are trying to hedge losses, then there would be only one side of the transaction, no other party to the transaction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Amanesh Bhaval, and thank you, Professor Tulpa Chakraborty, for their wonderful lecture, and also some very important research ideas. It's come out from those lectures like cluster analysis. I'm also interested about the cluster analysis. And also that weather derivative, which was in pursued America, not in India now. And so far my knowledge goes, in Bombay, there is a heavy rainfall in the period of June, July. There is very underlying company. One is probably Saraf and Company. They are doing that on that rainfall, on that heavy rainfall. They are doing this type of weather derivative product. They are dealing with that and this all other underlying business, not approved by the SEBI or company law. So hope that SEBI will, in the coming days, will realize the importance of weather derivative, the importance of climate change, and they will introduce some fantastic product in the stock market. And also, I'm also interested in those products. So now I have to ask Ms. Praveen Kaur. So please come, Ms. Praveen Kaur, to deliver his vote of thanks.
Respected Chairperson, distinguished speakers, honored dignitaries, esteemed colleagues, and dear participants, it is my proud privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. I extend my sincere gratitude to our esteemed chairperson, Professor Malda Sir, for his gracious presence and for steering this plenary session with great insight and wisdom. I express my heartfelt thanks to our distinguished speakers, Professor Amalesh Bhawal Sir and Professor Tulpa Chakraborty Ma'am, for their enlightening and thought-provoking deliberations. Your valuable insights have greatly enriched our understanding of the evolving dimensions of accounting and finance in the context of sustainability. I also extend my deep appreciation to all the respected dignitaries present here today for their encouragement and support. I would also like to thank all the participants for their active involvement and keen interest, which truly made this session engaging and meaningful. Thank you all. So we'll have a 5 minutes tea break now. After that, we'll begin with the conference session. So conference, yes sir. Conference session 1 will be held in the first floor, BCLR room 207, and conference session 2 will be held in this here. Thank you very much.
না না হাইট করে রেখেছি ডাল দিবে স্যার পারফেক্ট জীবনে তো পারফেক্ট করলো না বুঝতে পারছিস কি পারফেক্ট করতে পারফেক্ট না ওটা হাইট করবে আবার ওটা প্রসেস যাবে তখন আবার বলতে যে 3 4 কেন হচ্ছে চলো বাইরে যাবো দাদা